You want to learn how to draw warm and cozy interiors like these? Hi, my name is Oyun Orka, a VTuber who tries to draw, and while drawing interior scenes can seem challenging, it's actually relatively easy if you break it down into steps. So for today, let's talk about how to draw cozy interior scenes. So since interior scenes tend to have a lot of man-made objects, it's important to first at least understand some perspective, so let's first start off with some perspective basics. So generally when drawing perspective, you can break it down into three parts: the horizon line, the vanishing point, and any vanishing lines. As you can see here, since we have a singular vanishing point which all the vanishing lines branch out from, this is called one-point perspective. Aside from one-point perspective, there's also two-point perspective, three-point perspective, and also four-point perspective, but I'll focus on linear perspective for this tutorial, which means 1 to 3-point perspective. One-point perspective has a singular vanishing point on the horizon line, and all vanishing lines lead to the singular vanishing point. Objects horizontally at a 90-degree angle from the horizon line are straight and parallel to the horizon line, and vertical lines are straight but perpendicular to the horizon line. Meanwhile, for two-point perspective, there will be two vanishing points along the horizon line, and the distance between these 2 points can vary. All vanishing points will lead to either of these 2 points depending on which way they're facing. Any surface facing the left side will have the lines converging at the left vanishing point, and vice versa. And here, vertical lines will still remain straight and perpendicular to the horizon line. And finally, we have three-point perspective. For a three-point perspective, we typically have two vanishing points along the horizon line, and also a third vanishing point either above or below the horizon line. Here, instead of remaining straight and perpendicular to the horizon line, the vertical lines now converge at the third vanishing point. While there is also four-point perspective, to keep it simpler, let's focus on these for now and jump into making the perspective grids. So while you could draw your perspective grid manually, if you're using Clip Studio Paint, there are easy ways to do it automatically. The first way you could make a perspective grid is go under Layer, then go under Ruler Frame, and click Create Perspective Ruler. Here you can select which type of perspective ruler you'd like to create: one-point perspective, two-point perspective, or three-point perspective. And you can click whether you'd like to create it on a new layer or not. This will create a default perspective ruler which you can use pretty easily here. Here we have one-point perspective, here's two-point perspective, and finally three-point perspective. Alternatively, you can do it manually as well. By going under Create New Ruler and then Perspective Ruler, and make sure that your process is set to add vanishing point, you'll be able to add a perspective grid. By default, this will be a one-point perspective since you're just adding 1 point, but if you'd like to add multiple vanishing points, you can go ahead and add them as well. After adding another vanishing point, you'll see that the horizon line is a little bit slanted. To fix that, you can go under Operation, Object, and click anywhere on the ruler lines. Next, on the horizon line, click the horizon line, and just click Horizontalize Eye Level. Also in this menu, you'll be able to turn on and off the grid. You can turn on the grid for the XY plane in red, the YZ plane in green, and the XZ plane in blue. This will create a visual guide of where your lines will go when you're drawing on this perspective grid. Alternatively, if you don't want an entire grid taking up space on your canvas, instead of showing the entire grid, you can also go under Perspective Ruler, Process, and go under Add Guide. Whenever you draw a line from whichever point, it'll create a guide. You can move around any of the points by just going under Operation Object and moving this around. And if you want to delete guide, you can go under Delete Guide and just click on the ones that you want to delete. The Delete tool also works for vanishing points as well. If you'd like to delete a vanishing point, you just go under Process, Delete Vanishing Point, and then just click on the point that you'd like to delete, and now this will just be one-point perspective. And also, one more thing to note, if you're drawing and realizing that your lines aren't following the perspective grid, make sure that you have Snap to Special Ruler enabled. Without this, you won't be able to draw on the perspective grid rulers. Now that we have the basics of rulers down, let's start planning out the interior. At first, I try sketching by first placing down rulers and then drawing the interior, but I find that generally it's easier for me to sketch freely first and then correct perspective later, so I end up discarding this first background idea. Here, I'll go ahead and sketch out a desk in front of a window and play around with the posing a little bit before I settle on a sleeping on the desk pose. Once I have my sketch done, I'll use the perspective grid ruler to create a perspective grid that works with my drawing. I'll correct some perspective here and there, and then start lining. By the way, if you ever need to draw something more organic or not aligned to the perspective ruler, at any time you can either hide the layer with a ruler on it, turn off the ruler, or just disable the Snap to Special Ruler button like we covered earlier. I'll go ahead and line the bookshelf, the desk, the windows, chair, and character. If you're following along, you can draw any interior scene, though since later on I use lighting reliant on light coming from the windows, if you want to follow along, be sure to include a window or a lighting source of some sorts. While I'm sketching this, I also want to add in some props to the desk so it's not totally empty, like a lamp. In Clip Studio Paint, if you have the perspective grid enabled, you can also use the direct draw tools like rectangle, ellipse, or anything else on the perspective grid directly. Here, since I want to add a lamp, I'll plan the top and bottom of the lamp through drawing a circle, and it'll snap to grid automatically. The perspective grid direction it snaps to is dependent on the direction you're drawing in, as you can see here with the circles and with the rectangles. I'll go ahead and sketch in some more props, and then let's continue with the line art and move into flat colors. Since I want to go for a really cozy and warm look, I tend to like to use wood in interiors to push the warm feeling a little bit. Since I have the perspective rulers enabled, all I need to do is pick a direction and then draw with the textured or low opacity brush repeatedly to get this effect of wood texture on the desk. While I'm picking colors and drawing furniture from imagination this time, if you're struggling with base colors, you can try looking at furniture catalogs or photos for reference to piece together a scene that feels cozy for you. Now that our base colors are done, for the background, I'll go ahead and draw in the props. I'll make sure that the perspective grid is enabled as I draw on things that align to the grid, and turn it off for things slightly off the grid, like the papers or the curvature of the book. Speaking of books, for the bookshelf, a method that I really like to use to paint bookshelves is to use the calligraphy pen. Here, I'll change the angle of it so it generally aligns with the angle of the perspective, and just draw on some book spines. Since the perspective grid is on, I can pretty much easily change the width of each book by just changing the size of the pen, and draw on all my book spines. Next, on a new layer, I'll change the color to an off-white and then draw on the book pages here, just along the lines. Then, on a layer behind the spine and pages, I'll add in the side of the books to finish up. This method is great to draw books from a higher angle, especially since it shows the pages. And when you're done with this, you can just clean up the bookshelves by erasing the parts that aren't supposed to be visible. Now that we've finished our base colors, let's move into adding some cozy lighting. So first, since I want the background to look a little bit more painted and softer, I plan on hiding the line art later. So what I'll first do is actually hide the base colors for the background, and then make a new layer, and then use the Refer Other Layers Fill Bucket tool to fill in where I want the shadow to go. This way I have really sharp shadows that align with the lines that we made earlier. I first fill in any surfaces that are facing away from the window, and then add in shadows at an angle, imagining the sun to be setting in this scene. I'm doing this all on a single layer, using a solid brown color to push the warm tones a little bit, and then blurring the edges using the fingertip blend tool. Once that's finished, I'll set this to multiply, and now we have a nice shadow area blocked in. Since these shadows are really high contrast, I can now comfortably hide the line art of the background, and have it generally still look the same. Now I'll repeat that but with the character and props, but this time instead of blocking it in, I'll be erasing from it. I'll fill the entire layer with the same brown color we used earlier, clip that to the character, and then erase where I want there to be light. Once that's done, I'll go ahead and select the area with both the shadows, inverse the selection, and then on a new layer, fill that entire layer with a light tannish color, and then set that to overlay. This creates a nice warm light effect on the areas where there aren't shadow. Now we're almost done. For a final touch, I'll go ahead and add in some bounce light and reflections, including on the desk reflecting the light from the windows, on the floors reflecting the bookshelf, and the wall next to the lampshade. Here, since I also think the skin is a little bit too pale, I'll also add another multiply layer with a very light beige and clip that over the character. Then, after adding some light texture to the windows and filtering it slightly, we're done. And that's it. Thank you for watching, and I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, I would appreciate if you could give this video a like, and subscribe if you'd like to see more from my channel. Also, if you want to learn more about how I use color and light in my art, check out this video linked on screen here. I'll see you next time. Bye bye!